Trump's 50% tariffs on Indian exports are now in effect, and the shock is already rippling through the Indian economy. Gems, jewelry, textiles, leather, furniture, garments, auto exports, auto parts particularly, and seafood. We're looking at all of these sectors that will be heavily impacted in India. Nearly every labor-intensive sector could be hit. Surat's diamonds, Tirupur's garments, Moradabad's brass and carpets, Andhra's shrimp farms, all now staring at a near collapse. 70% of their business would be hit. Experts warn exports to the United States could shrink by almost half, falling from what was 86 billion, that will be now 50 billion odd by next year. Now that would really wipe out hundreds and thousands of jobs in India and hand businesses to rivals like Vietnam, Bangladesh, and above all to China. For India, the United States is its largest trading partner. India dealt with the United States as its largest trading partner with nearly $212 billion trading revenue. But for Washington, for the United States, India is not, making this a heavy one-sided blow certainly. Trump's justification here is India's continued purchase of Russian oil, which the White House says indirectly funds Moscow's war on Ukraine. The Modi government has called the move as unfair, justified. Of course, India now crying foul. The cushion that Prime Minister Modi is giving for India, multiple relief measures that's been announced, verbal assurance has come in to cushion this hit. The Modi government has rolled out some relief measures that include GST reforms, income tax cuts, subsidies for exporters, and a push for self-reliance. The Prime Minister, in fact, on the Independence Day speech said India must become self-reliant and not out of desperation but out of sheer pride. So he's been really pushing in that direction. And we were already on that track. It seems like now the Trump tariffs has only escalated this further or expedited it. And now India is hitting back in many ways. We hear India is, of course, doing everything it can to stabilize the economy, one of which the Indian government has decided to unveil its first countermeasure, 40-country outreach drive to push the Indian textiles and apparels, which is the biggest market that will be hit owing to Trump tariffs, into new markets now. Now, this new campaign targets big economies like UK, Japan, South Korea, Germany, France, and Australia, along with other emerging markets, all to cut reliance on the United States. In fact, together, these nations import over 590 billion worth of textiles annually, and India's share in the 590 billion is barely 5 to 6%. So India is now looking at increasing that figure and pushing to these countries our finest textiles. The new campaign wants to position India as a reliable supplier of sustainable and innovative products, with export promotion councils and Indian missions leading this push. Meanwhile, we hear the Commerce Ministry in India is set to be meeting with the exporters across shrimp, leather, jewelry and chemicals to work out relief. Conversations are on to see how there could be some subsidy given to them, some kind of push and cushioning, additional push for them to sustain this period and also push them into other emerging markets. A long-term export promotion mission is on the cards, leveraging new trade deals with the UK and EFTA countries to absorb this shock. But Trump's tariffs are also shifting geopolitics. India is now warming up with countries like China, who we didn't see eye to eye for a long time. Now, with China, we had a trade deal of nearly $136 billion just a few years ago until we were great with them. And it seems like President Putin of Russia is now set to visit Delhi as well. India doubling down on its relationship with Russia despite Trump tariff. So in a way, Trump really pushing India to its neighboring countries, and that is something that Trump might not have expected. Markets are nervous though, Sensex already slipping by 1%, but New Delhi, India insists that it won't let tariffs choke exports. Instead, it's turning now the crisis into opportunity. We hear a lot of measures being adopted now, and India currently on overdrive, the Indian government and policymakers, to ensure all our goods is pushed into new other markets. Joining me live to discuss a little more on Trump tariffs and how it begins today, what impact could we see with immediate effect, Ambassador Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the United States, joins us. We also have Jayant Dasgupta, former ambassador to WTO, and Mitli Nikore, founder and chief economist of Nikore Associates, Dr. Amalendu Misra, Professor of International Politics, Lancaster University. Thank you very much. Let me bring in the economists first. Mitali Nikore, your take, ma'am, on this very tariff that we've been slapped with. We know that India has geared up to to try and push ourselves into other emerging markets. But how long do you think that will take to happen? What kind of immediate impact and effect would we see on the Indian economy?
No, absolutely. And thanks a lot for involving me in today's discussion. I think the government has really been, very quick to respond and to understand the magnitude of this crisis. So I've actually spent the whole day pretty much speaking to a number of MSME association and industry associations as we research this issue in depth. And what we're realizing is that there are certain clusters where there's almost been a complete stoppage of production from today. And Tirupur, some units in Tirupur are part of that. Some units in Noida and even in Gurgaon are part of that in the textile space. In the other industries, there's no stoppage of production, but they are, ruminating other measures. One of the measures which is very critical for all industries, especially the MSMEs, is to use third party exports. So, sort of saying, take your goods to a third country like a Bangladesh or a Sri Lanka, do some more value addition there, and, then export from there. The gems and jewelry sector, number of statements also being issued by the gems and jewelry sector that they might do this last value addition in the UAE and then move from there. So I think a lot of new markets are being explored for the second round of value addition of products. But the people who will lose out the most are really the workers, the employees, who work in these factories, and the lowest common denominator, the lowest level of workers, because they are the unskilled workers. They cannot move, and these job losses are something that we haven't yet estimated what the numbers could be, but they could be fairly high. So I think
Yeah.
the need for the government to come in here is very quick, and they have been very quick to respond as well.
Okay, well, the government has responded saying that we're going to give some subsidies to cushion this impact. But who foots the bill for these subsidies? Taxpayers?
No, of course. I mean, this will have a fiscal impact at the end of the day when, this comes out from the government budget. But in a situation like this, where it's really the common person who's going to be much more impacted. And in fact, the biggest impact could come on the women workers in many of these textile, production houses. That's where the government really has a case to step in, and they really have to step in. Emergency financing is one way. Opening new doors into new markets is a second way. And I think the long term support mission, which is being talked about, this long term export promotion mission, is the most critical piece of the puzzle, because coming to 40 new countries marketing your products is not possible for MSMEs. It's a very costly proposition. So in this situation, the government has to come in and provide that financial support before MSMEs and other industry leaders can come in.
Okay, and that support has been assured by the government verbally, by the central bank, the central government. A word of assurance has come, but there's no policy rollout as yet on how this would really trickle in, what kind of benefits would people get. And interestingly, from what we see here, as much as we would say with pride that India is self-sustained, made in India is thriving and whatnot, this blow will be harsh because India and the United States traded heavily. In fact, for the United States, India may not be the largest exporter or importer, but for India, United States was the biggest trade partner. So it will deal a blow to the economy, and from what we see, the IMF projecting 6.4% growth for 2026. With Trump tariffs now, not too sure if we're going to achieve that figure. And how far will that figure be impacted? We'll come to that. But on the geopolitics side, if I could bring in Ambassador Meera Shankar. Ambassador Meera Shankar, you've been in the United States, extensively learned the relationship between the two countries. We saw Prime Minister Modi and Donald Trump having this growing bromance. For the last decade, they had a great relationship, and it's come crashing down. And how? It almost feels like India thought that Trump would take a U-turn. At every given point, we thought that Trump would back off and say, all right, we're friends. Let's give you this. Let's credit you, and give you this leeway. But that hasn't happened. In fact, China got that leeway. Despite buying from Russia, China still does not get that additional 25%.
So that's why some analysts are saying that it's a dual message and India's got caught in the US global geopolitical agenda. So India is being used to A, send a warning to Russia, B, send a message to China that the US doesn't seek to contain it through the sanctions which have been tariffs which have been imposed on India but not on China, and so on. There's also speculation that this might be the result of personal pique by President Trump against India because a trade deal was almost ready. And, Scott Bessent had said, the US Commerce Secretary had said that India could be probably one of the first countries with whom they signed a deal. I don't think that the Indian side believed that the US will somehow ease off the tariffs, because going by what President Trump has done and his seriousness over this was quite clearly indicated. So I think that there has been an estimation also what the costs would be, because what we see is that the tariffs are now being used for non-trade purposes, to actually then control foreign and strategic policy, and to say that India can do this, can't do that. I think that is something which is unacceptable. And as far as the trade talks go, I think the farm sector is a very crucial sector for India, because 50% of our population survives on it, and these are subsistence farmers with less than 2-acre farms. They really can't compete with the mega corporations of the US. So in that sense, I think any government in India would find it difficult to open up the agriculture sector wholesale. But there were products which we were buying from the US in the agriculture sector, and also scope to purchase more. And I'm sure those offers were made, and that's why it was believed that a deal was almost done, almost ready. But I think that, as I said, these two reasons, one is personal pique, perhaps, at the fact that India publicly contradicted his claim that he mediated an end to the military conflict.
Ego, because India has not acknowledged Trump's mediation. It's just plain bruised ego.
Well, it's a mix, I would say, and the other is because there was pressure to do something, and Trump has not put additional sanctions on Russia after the talks.
Yeah.
And B,
and
he
Trump
has
is
not
exploring
put,
multiple energy deals with Russia as we speak.
Yeah, if I may, he has also not put any tariffs on China. He's not put any tariffs on EU, which is the largest importer of gas from Russia still. And China imported $10 billion worth more of energy from Russia than we did. He hasn't put tariffs on Turkey. So the basic question remains, it's a bit of a puzzle why this has been done. But I think
Trump's justification to trade bodies and whoever's asking, basically, is that India has heavy tariffs on US goods. Trump particularly points at India's 39% average tariff on agricultural imports compared to America's 4% that they put on Indian imports. So,
Let me say that agriculture is quite often a protected sector in many countries, including the EU. And in fact, the WTO deal was first done when eventually agriculture was kept out of the scope of the WTO deal. And even now, in the mini deals that the US has done with Japan and the EU, they haven't requested them to open up their agriculture markets wholesale. I mean, the EU has agreed to some things, but they still have restrictions on entry of genetically modified products. Similarly, Japan has agreed to open up its rice market for the US, but they import rice in any case, but not the wholesale opening up of agriculture, even though these countries are not really having such a vast population dependent on agriculture. So, whatever it is, it's a bit startling. And it could also be that having built up this huge thing that he's going to slap China with tariffs, will be the heaviest tariffs ever, and then having been forced to climb down because China used its leverage through dominance of critical minerals and rare earths, that Trump had to walk back, that then you find a more manageable large target, and that's India. Because India doesn't have leverage vis-a-vis the US, at least economically. We export more to the US than we import, and there's really nothing that we export which the US could not get from other sources. So it is a harsh blow. It erodes trust, and India will have to see how it copes with it, both through a mix of trade diversification, stepping up the pace of searching for new markets, providing fiscal support to sectors which may be impacted, particularly labor-intensive sectors. I wouldn't call it subsidy, as you have used several times. I would call it financial support, because subsidy is a very loaded word as far as the WTO is concerned. And the third element would be internal reforms to make trading easier, clearing logistic bottlenecks, clearing bureaucratic regulatory hurdles, so that it's much easier for our exporters to actually export. So I think there are a range of issues which need to be tackled, and with a sense of urgency as far as India is concerned. Geopolitically, we are trying to rebalance, if you will, the opening to Russia again. I mean, we've always had a good relationship with Russia, but
we're basically doubling down, and that just speaks of India's autonomy.
China as well.
Yeah.
But again, as far as China is concerned, I think that there will be, some limits.
Correct. Ma'am, I will come back to you on that. We will revisit relationship with China. But Jayan Das Gupta, your take on America saying one of the only reasons that India gets the highest tariffs is because India has not budged when it comes to negotiations. 5 rounds fell flat because America pushed for an opening into India's agricultural sector and asked for India to reduce tariffs on US goods. But India has imposed 36% tariffs for US agricultural imports, but Indian agricultural exports to US, they had imposed only 4% tariffs. So Trump said India has taken US for a ride for way too long. It's now time to get back. I'm not getting into the other 25% on Russian oil imports.
Well, I think President Trump, is way off the mark in terms of the tariffs that India charges. And what he is referring to is the average applied tariffs, which is quite different from the weighted mean of the tariffs which India applies. It is comparing apples with oranges. So let us not get into that, because that is, I think, past history, because now he is fixating on the purchase of Russian oil. I think the GM crop issue, the soya, the corn, and the dairy products access, that has all been pushed to the background, and it is now about Russian oil. That is his now pet peeve about India. And as Ambassador Meera Shankar has pointed out very clearly, the Europeans buy a lot more of gas and oil put together. They buy about 22% of what Russia sells in the global market. The Chinese buy a hell of a lot more. And India comes in the third position. Of course, Turkey is also there. And they have not been touched at all by the tariffs, the secondary tariffs, as we say, on the purchase of Russian oil. The other point is that Brazil has actually got a trade deficit with the US, and still it has been slapped with 50% tariffs. So, first you decide what kind of tariff you want to
So
apply,
there's
and then
really
you
no
look
one
around for
formula
a
fits
reason.
all when Trump is dealing with nations on tariff. Clearly, it's mostly his ego at play.
So it is not, it is bereft of any rationality or
Yeah.
logic. Because, in the case of Brazil, why would he slap tariffs on Brazil, which has a trade deficit with respect to the US? So I don't think this makes any sense at all. And as far as the industry is concerned, Indian industry, the government is taking steps. They have made an outreach to 40 countries. They planned an outreach to 40 countries for textiles and clothing, which is very, labor intensive industry and provides the largest employment in
Correct.
India after agriculture.
But do
So,
you
but it
believe
will take time.
how long? How long do you believe that this 40 country outreach will take to ease this pain of the textile traders? We know that there are new markets like UK, Japan, South Korea, Germany, France, and Australia. Precisely the countries that now India is pushing textiles to export textiles into these countries. Are these markets right now wanting to deal with India on textiles? I mean, is there a need for that kind of, or is there a demand within these countries for Indian textiles? How do you think that these countries are going to respond to India's push in that space?
The short answer to that is that India already has an FTA with Japan and Korea,
Yes.
and a lot of the textiles and clothing lines are already included at zero duty or near zero duty.
Yeah.
So I don't think we will, in a hurry, we are going to get additional market access there.
Yes.
But there is, we are negotiating an FTA with the EU, which is slated to be concluded by November, December this year. And the EU provides a 9.6% advantage to many of our competitors like Vietnam, like Bangladesh, like Pakistan in textiles and clothing. So if we were to get zero duty access, if we were to conclude this FTA, it would be a huge advantage for Indian exporters to get an additional market. And of course, we will have to compete with the other countries which also have lower duty access. So it is a question of competition. It is a question of getting our own act together in reducing our transaction costs, as Ambassador Shankar mentioned, about ease of doing business in short. And the other point is that there will be pain. We have to, if we were to give up our strategic autonomy, if we were to go crawling back to the US, if I may say, put these hard words in use, and to say that, all right, we will give you zero duty access in everything, but you slap us with whatever tariffs you feel is appropriate for us. That is not going to be taken to very kindly by the Indian public and India. And so it is out of the question. We will
That we
not
can't
give up
look
on our
desperate or
strategic
needy
autonomy.
with the United States right now. And India has its own pride. Made in India is already
Yes. And I
in
only wanted
momentum.
to,
So this really pushes us to escalate that. But at the end of it, it's the poor, those who are impacted who can really speak. We could just be here
they
today
will have to
discussing
be.
this. In fact, I had Dr. Amlendu, before I get back to Jayantas Gupta, Dr. Amlendu Mishra, who's a professor of international politics at Lancaster University. Your take on Leicester University, I beg your pardon. Your take on the tariffs imposed on India. We are looking at the United States boasting that at this point, Trump has given a recent soundbite or spoken to the media saying that now we're getting billions and billions of dollars into the government coffers after appropriate tariffs were levied on countries. Countries have now complied. All this while they were taking America for a ride. Now money is coming in to government coffers. So he's boasting of it. But on the other hand, I hear that America is set for inflation. that the country isn't economically doing very well, and this could be just posturing by Donald Trump at this point. What's, in your view, the condition or the status of America at this point? Do you think these tariffs are really benefiting the people of America? Their America First push, is this really going to help them achieve that?
Well, good evening to all your viewers. First of all, Donald Trump likes a good soundbite. He likes to hear his own voice, and he doesn't let an opportunity pass by without boasting about what he has done. So let me do a bit of a psychoanalysis of the reason why President Trump is imposing this tariff on India. He has been a complete and utter failure in terms of his foreign policy. The escalation of war in Gaza continues. Israel does whatever it wants to do. It doesn't care toots about Washington. So that's a complete failure. And you have seen the bleeding Ukrainian war, which he has promised that will end within 30 days of his taking over the office, Oval Office. And there hasn't been any kind of positive kind of movement in that particular direction. So what is happening here is that he was basically looking for a fall guy, the weak link. He couldn't do that with China because China is the biggest creditor to the United States. He couldn't do that with European Union because their strategic partnership is something that will undermine the United States. And India is the rising power. And it wanted to give it a bloody nose, the Trump administration. So they was looking for a fall guy, and India happens to be the one that fits the bill here. So that could be the psychoanalysis. And to go back to your question about how is it going to impact American economy, let's not forget that it is a two-way process. Yes, India is going to be hit hard, but at the same time, American consumers are also going to get hit hard. I mean, if they're used to, let's say, for example, seafood, if they're used to cheap textile products, if they're used to, let's say, for example, medicine and so on and so forth, they are going to be affected. Okay, they will have different sources, but it's not the same thing as getting your basmati from India compared to your basmati from Vietnam, for that matter. So Trump administration is going through the inflation argument. We still have to wait and see what the current figures are, because there is a lot of talk on that. Unless and until we have that in paper, so we can't say how the economy is doing in America.
So is there a magic formula on how this could find a solution? Could we fix this problem? Jayant Das Gupta, I cut you short previously.
No, I just wanted to add on this point that the Congressional and Budget Office has calculated that if all the assumptions go right, then by 2035, which is another 10 years from now, a corpus of $4 trillion, $4,000 billion would have been collected by the US Treasury by way of additional revenue on account of the Trump tariffs. But that is, making a huge lot of assumptions. And as you mentioned a short while ago, if inflationary pressures kick in, they have already started kicking in, and the inflation index now is about 3% currently. And President Trump is at great pains to pressure the Federal Reserve into lowering the interest rates. Because with the rise in inflation, the tendency of the Federal Reserve or any central banker is to raise the rates of lending. And that is why there is a direct conflict with Jerome Powell. And now he's targeted Lisa Cook, another member of the Federal Reserve. And he's given her marching orders. And Lisa Powell, of course, has threatened to take him to court, saying that he doesn't have the powers to remove her from office. So it is unfolding. And with inflation rising, with the common man getting hurt, and the midterm elections, just around the corner, the preparations for it would have begun by now, but they would be at full pitch by early spring. And then there would be a backlash. There would be pressure on President Trump, not only from the common man on the street, but from Republicans who would be fighting the midterm elections and would ask President Trump to back off, to roll back the tariffs. Whether India will
That's
benefit from
interesting.
that or not is another question.
I
I
think 2
really
points.
appreciate all of
If
you
I
as
may,
yes, ma'am.
if I may, 2 points I'd like to just mention here when
Yeah.
you mentioned the difference in tariffs on agri markets. The fact is that it is America which is absolutely destroying the WTO.
Yeah.
India is complying with its WTO commitments, and its actual tariffs are lower than the tariffs which were bound in the WTO
Yeah.
by India as part of a multilateral agreement. So let's not forget the basics. When you're talking about differential
Correct.
in tariffs,
Yeah.
those differences were negotiated and agreed upon as part of a multilateral agreement.